The room was quiet, yet the tension between them pressed against the walls like a secret trying to escape. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath, but far enough that she couldn't accuse him of wanting more. Her fingers brushed his hand, accidentally, she would claim, yet the touch lingered long enough to betray her. He looked at her the way a man looks when he knows he shouldn't feel anything, but already feels too much. And she knew it. She always knew it. She wanted loyalty. Demanded it, even. But behind her eyes lived a truth she refused to acknowledge, another man's shadow, another man's claim, a decision she hadn't fully accepted but couldn't walk away from. She carried contradictions the way others carry perfume, softly, invisibly, leaving traces on anyone who stepped close enough. He wasn't supposed to care. She wasn't supposed to want him to. But that unspoken heat between them whispered that neither was innocent in this quiet storm they built. Tonight she sought comfort in his presence, sitting beside him with a closeness that could be excused as friendly. But her gaze said something entirely different, something tender, lonely, and dangerously hopeful. He tried to hold himself still, pretending her nearness didn't unravel him, pretending he couldn't feel the tremble in her breath when their eyes locked for just a second too long. She looked away first. She always did. But not before he saw it, that flicker of longing she fought so hard to hide. Maybe it was the late hour. Maybe it was the way the lamplight softened the edges of her guilt. Or maybe it was the truth neither of them wanted to name. They were inching toward a line that, once crossed, would change everything. Her voice quivered when she finally spoke, asking him something simple, something harmless, yet he heard the weight beneath the words. He answered softly, as if loudness might shatter the fragile distance they were clinging to. And then it happened, a pause. A breath. A moment suspended in the air. She looked up at him, eyes full of a question she was terrified to voice. He leaned in without meaning to, caught in her gravity. The world tightened around them. They didn't touch. But they almost did. And that almost was enough to set everything in motion. The moment stretched, thin as a whisper and twice as fragile. She pulled her gaze away first, inhaling sharply as if the air between them had turned too warm to breathe. He leaned back slightly, not because he wanted distance, but because he feared what he'd do if he didn't create it. Still, the space he made wasn't enough to stop the gravity tugging them closer. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded, but her voice betrayed her. "Yeah. I just needed to be here tonight." Her hands folded on her lap, then unfolded, restless, searching for something to hold onto. When he placed his hand next to hers, not touching, just close, her fingers drifted toward him like they had their own ideas. She stopped herself at the last second. But the almost touch pulsed through both of them. He watched her with a softness he didn't mean to show. "You can talk to me, you know." The sincerity in his tone made her chest tighten. He didn't judge her, didn't corner her, didn't demand what she wasn't ready to give. That was exactly why she kept coming back to him, and exactly why she was terrified. She exhaled slowly. "It's complicated. I figured," he said with a faint, sad smile. "It usually is with you." Her laugh came out small, breakable. "I don't mean for it to be. I know." His voice dropped lower, almost tender. "But you're still here." That truth landed between them, warm and heavy. She looked at him again, longer this time. Her eyes searched his, not for answers, but for comfort she didn't want to admit she needed. He felt her looking, really looking, and his breath caught. He didn't move. Didn't dare. Her knee brushed his leg. A soft touch. Barely anything. But he felt it everywhere. She didn't apologize. And he didn't pretend he didn't notice. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she whispered, voice trembling with guilt she couldn't hide. "And I don't want to be the reason you do," he replied. But they both knew it was already too late for clean lines and simple choices. A silence followed, slow, simmering, electric. He saw her swallow hard, watched her fingertips twitch closer to him, watched her fight the urge to close the distance. She leaned in, just slightly, as if drawn by something she didn't know how to resist. "Tell me to go," she murmured. He didn't. He couldn't. And in that tiny, dangerous pause, the world felt seconds away from tipping over the edge. The air felt charged, almost trembling, as if the room itself sensed everything they weren't saying. She shifted slightly, and he felt the brush of her shoulder, light, almost non-existent, but enough to make his breath falter. She pulled her hand back a little too quickly afterward, as though the contact had startled her, or maybe because it had awakened something she wasn't ready to face. He noticed. He noticed everything. "You're quiet," he said softly. "I don't know what I'm allowed to say," she replied, voice low, careful, aching. He turned toward her. Not fully, just enough to let her know she had his whole attention. Her eyes flickered to his mouth for half a second before she caught herself and looked down. That tiny slip was enough to undo him. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to ground himself. "You can be honest," he murmured. She shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "Honesty is the problem." He waited. She didn't continue. Instead, she leaned back into the couch, letting her head fall against the cushions, exposing a little more vulnerability than she intended. He watched her chest rise and fall, watched the way she gripped the edge of a pillow to keep her hands busy, anything to avoid reaching for him. "I feel like I'm split in two," she whispered. "Like there's the version of me trying to do the right thing, and then there's the version sitting here with you." He swallowed hard. "And which one are you right now?" She turned her head, meeting his eyes. The silence was heavy, slow, intimate. Her lips parted. She had an answer, but she didn't give it. Instead, her gaze softened, and she reached out, almost without thinking, brushing her fingertips against his wrist. It lasted a second. Maybe two. But for both of them, it felt like an eternity. He inhaled sharply, but didn't pull away. She was the one who broke the contact, retreating as if burned. Her breath shook. "I shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. "That's the problem," she replied, voice cracking. "It didn't feel wrong." He looked down, then back at her, slow, deliberate, searching. "Maybe that means something." "It can't," she said, though her eyes said the opposite. "If I let myself want this, I don't know if I'll be able to stop." His pulse hammered. He shifted closer, not enough to touch, but enough that the warmth between them pulsed like a heartbeat. "Maybe I don't want you to stop," he whispered. She closed her eyes at that, a soft, pained sound escaping her lips, equal parts longing and fear. When she opened them again, she leaned toward him, just an inch, just a breath, but then stopped herself, fingers curling into her palm to keep from reaching. She wasn't pulling away because she didn't want him. She was pulling away because she wanted him too much. The air between them felt alive, humming with something neither of them dared to name. She sat forward slightly, her breath unsteady, her eyes shimmering with the weight of everything she'd been holding back. He watched her so closely it felt like he was memorizing her, every tremor, every inhale, every flicker of hesitation. She wasn't running from him now. She was standing at the edge of something dangerous, and she looked ready to fall. "I keep trying to tell myself this is nothing," she whispered. "That whatever this is will pass." His voice came out rough, quiet. "Has it?" She shook her head. "No. It feels worse every time I'm near you." He swallowed hard. "Worse?" She looked up, slow, almost trembling, and her eyes met his with a soft, frightened honesty that hit him in the chest. "Worse because, every time I sit here, I want you more than I should." The words cracked something open in the room. He blinked, stunned by the confession he'd been aching to hear, but terrified of what it meant for her, what it meant for both of them. He leaned in, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath brush her skin. "You think you're the only one?" he murmured. Her lips parted, her pulse visible in the delicate line of her throat. She didn't move away. She didn't even blink. He reached up slowly, so slowly she could have stopped him at any second, and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips barely grazed her skin. A feather-light touch. Almost nothing. She inhaled sharply, the kind of breath people take when they're trying not to tremble. She closed her eyes for a moment, like she needed the world to stand still just so she could breathe again. "That's why I'm scared," she whispered. He lowered his forehead until it almost touched hers, a breath apart, a heartbeat away. "Tell me to stop." "I will." She didn't. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then landed lightly against his chest. Not gripping, not pulling, just resting there, as if testing the shape of a moment she dreamed about too many times. He exhaled, shuddering beneath her touch. "You don't want me to stop," she whispered. He let out a soft, helpless laugh. "No. I don't." Their breaths tangled. Her fingers curled slightly into his shirt. The gap between them shrank to something unbearably thin, charged enough to set the entire room alight. He could feel her heartbeat. She could feel his. They weren't touching any more than they already were. But it felt like they were about to break every rule they had left. And then, right before the world could tip, she froze. A single second of stillness. A single breath of fear. A single moment holding the entire weight of what might happen if they dared 1 inch more. The explosion didn't come. Not yet. But the fuse was lit. The storm started softly, the first drops tapping against the windows like a warning neither of them heard. The room glowed with the warm, low light of a single lamp, shadows stretching long across the walls. They stood there, still, breathless, caught between fear and gravity. Something inside her finally unraveled, and something inside him finally gave way. She took one quiet step toward him. He didn't move. Didn't dare. He just watched her with the kind of aching patience that felt like devotion. Her hand rose, trembling slightly, and touched his jaw, not possessive, not desperate, just honest. His eyes fluttered closed at the warmth of her fingers, as if he'd been waiting for that single moment longer than he should admit. She breathed in, and her breath melted into his, soft as silk, warm as a secret that had finally stopped hiding. "You don't have to pretend anymore," she whispered. His voice came out barely audible. "Neither do you." The rain thickened outside, a slow rhythm against the glass, and in that sound, something quiet inside them broke open. She moved closer until her forehead touched his chest, until his arms rose without thought, without permission, wrapping around her as if she had always belonged there. Their bodies didn't collide, they found one another gently, naturally, like two pieces of the same feeling. She lifted her head. Their faces hovered inches apart. His thumb brushed her cheek, a slow, reverent stroke. Her lips parted. His breath shivered. Then they leaned in, not sudden, not rushed, but with the weight of every moment that led them here. Their lips met in a soft, trembling kiss that deepened not because of heat, but because of everything they'd been trying not to feel. Her hands slid up his chest, fingertips mapping truths she never dared say aloud. He held her like she was fragile and fierce at once, like he didn't know whether to steady her or surrender. The kiss grew warmer, slower, deeper, an unspoken confession unfolding between lips and breath. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't hungry. It was honest. It was the kind of kiss that changes the temperature of a room. Her breath blended with his as they moved toward the couch, not breaking apart, just shifting, guided by instinct and longing. She held his face in both hands. He pressed his forehead to hers, breaths hitching in a shared rhythm that felt almost sacred. Their bodies pressed close, not in desperation, but in understanding. His hand slid up her back, drawing her nearer until her heart beat against his. She nestled into him, her lips trailing along his jaw, her breath warm against his skin. He exhaled a trembling sound, the kind that comes from waiting too long. Their bodies spoke the words they couldn't say. Her sigh answered his unspoken question. His touch answered hers. Wrapped in each other, the world outside blurred, the rain, the shadows, the hesitation. Everything softened. Everything melted. Nothing was explicit. Nothing needed to be. Because the way she held his face, the way he breathed her name against her skin, The way their hearts beat in the same unsteady rhythm, that was intimacy enough. The night didn't explode. It bloomed. Quietly. Slowly. Beautifully. And for the first time, they stopped running. Morning crept in gently, soft light spilling across the room like it was afraid to wake them. She opened her eyes first. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay there, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. His arm was draped around her, holding her the way someone holds something they aren't ready to lose. It should have brought comfort. Instead, her chest tightened with a complicated mix of warmth and fear. She shifted slightly. His hand instinctively tightened around her waist before he blinked awake, confusion passing briefly through his expression before memory settled in. He looked down at her, searching her face carefully, gently, like he was afraid of what she might say. "Morning," he murmured. She swallowed. "Morning." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, not at first. Then she sat up, pulling the blanket with her, fingers twisting it anxiously. He stayed lying there for a moment, watching her back, watching her shoulders rise and fall with breaths that sounded too careful. Finally, he pushed himself upright. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, but only once. "I just don't know what last night was." He felt that like a bruise. "It was real," he said quietly. "Whatever else it was real." She closed her eyes, guilt flickering across her features. "Real doesn't mean simple. You know that." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'm not asking for simple. That's the problem," she whispered. "I don't know what I can give you. I don't even know what I'm allowed to feel right now." He didn't get angry. Didn't pull away. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, gently, like he was asking permission. She didn't let go. "I'm not trying to trap you. I just don't want to pretend nothing happened." She stared at their intertwined fingers, her expression softening but still conflicted. "I don't want to pretend either," she said. "But what happens now?" Before he could answer, a knock echoed through the apartment, sharp, unexpected, jarring. Her breath caught. "No, not today!" His stomach dropped at the fear in her voice. "Who is it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood, clutching the blanket around herself like armor, and moved toward the door with hesitant steps. He followed her with his gaze, feeling something icy crawl up his spine. She opened the door only a crack. A familiar voice slipped through. A voice she hadn't expected. A voice that shouldn't have been there. "I need to talk to you," the man outside said. Her shoulders tensed. Hard. He froze on the couch, heart hammering. Last night had changed everything, but morning had come with consequences. And the connection between them, fragile and burning, suddenly felt like something they'd have to fight for, or let break. The door closed softly behind the man who came looking for answers, leaving the apartment in a silence so delicate it felt like it might break under its own weight. She stood there for a long moment, forehead resting against the wood, breathing like someone trying not to fall apart. He stayed on the couch, watching her with a quiet ache twisting through his chest. When she finally turned around, her eyes were glossy, not with regret, but with the heaviness of choosing something she never thought she'd have to choose. "He's gone," she whispered. He nodded, but stayed still, giving her room to walk toward him. She took her time, each step slow, uncertain, as if she was afraid of the answer hiding inside herself. When she reached him, she didn't sit at first. She just stood between his knees, looking down at him with a softness that felt like an apology and a confession all at once. "I didn't lie last night," she said. "I meant every feeling, every breath, every moment." He swallowed, voice low. "But—" She shook her head gently and stepped closer, finally lowering herself beside him. "Not but. Just. And I can't go back to pretending my heart is somewhere it isn't." He exhaled, stunned, relief blooming slow and warm across his chest. She took his hands, threading her fingers through his. "I thought loyalty meant staying where I was, even when I wasn't fully there. But last night made me realize, loyalty is choosing where your heart truly lives. Her voice softened to a near tremor. And mine's here. He lifted her hand and pressed it to his forehead, closing his eyes as if grounding himself in the truth of her touch. She leaned into him, settling her head on his shoulder, their breaths finding the same rhythm like it was the easiest thing in the world. No grand declarations. No dramatic promises. Just warmth. Just quiet. Just peace. He tilted his head and pressed a slow kiss to her forehead, gentle, grateful, lingering. She sighed, melting into him, letting her past loosen its grip. In that moment, neither of them felt rushed. The world outside could wait. They didn't erase the complications. They didn't pretend it would be simple. But they chose each other, with honesty, with tenderness, with the kind of love that grows from truth, not illusion. And as the morning light settled around them, soft and golden, they stayed wrapped in the quiet certainty that what they had wasn't borrowed or stolen. It was finally real. And it was theirs.